Hello, everybody, and welcome back to this week's episode of Back to Basics. It's taken you a week to catch up with us, but it's only taken us about a minute and a half. Ain't it grand? I, as usual, am Pastor Don. Joining me is the magnificent, amazing, and very, very wonderful Courtney, who I will say is thus every single episode until she gets a very thick skull. Courtney!
Hi. What is this?
Me being aggressively complimentary. Hey,
Anyway,
we do what we do. So today we are looking at Genesis chapter 7. Last week was the lead up to the flood, and today is the day we pull the trigger, and so does God. So, are we ready to do the thing?
yeah, it would help if I had pulled up there we are, Genesis 7.
All right, why don't I read this
go.
one since you were the last?
Yeah, right on. And I will read along.
All right, Genesis chapter 7. Bum, 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 the great flood. Then the Lord said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you alone are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and its mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and its mate, and 7 pairs of the birds of the air also, male and female, to keep their kind alive on the face of the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground." And Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters came on the earth. And Noah with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Of clean animals and animals that are not clean, and of birds and of everything that creeps on the ground, 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah, as God had commanded Noah. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came on the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. The rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah with his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife and the 3 wives of his sons entered the ark. They and every wild animal of every kind, and all domestic animals of every kind, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every bird of every kind, they went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. The flood continued 40 days on the earth, and the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters swelled and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. The waters swelled so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters swelled above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, domestic animals, wild animals, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all human beings. Everything on dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, human beings and animals and creeping things and birds of the air. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. And the waters swelled on the earth for 150 days.
So it makes sure to pound that point home.
Everybody died. No, I'm not kidding. Everybody died. No.
Yes,
You may have misheard me. Everybody died. That's some old school biblical emphasis for you. How about that?
Yeah. So,
what do we see here? Anything interesting aside from, everybody dying?
It's, as someone who was a Sunday school kid and everything, it all seems kind of rote to me. I'm just accustomed to this story. And like, it's told almost like a fairy tale, which is fitting because it just doesn't make any sense. Like, it cannot. And I know I'm addressing it as literalist, but I feel like that's an important aspect of this too. Like
where a lot of us are.
This is literally impossible. And not just like with God it's possible. Okay. How did Noah get the creatures that live on other continents that, there's no possible way for him to get at,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because same stuff doesn't live all over the world. You know,
Mhm.
how'd he get his kangaroos?
And even
You
if it
know,
was just regional, like discounting the fact that sometimes it's 7, 2 of everything would be more than could fit in an ark of that size.
yeah.
Like just space concerns, not counting the sheer amount of food and stuff they would need for what is effectively like a 5.5, 6 month journey.
Yeah.
Like, by the way, this is a point I love to drive home. Is you ask your Sunday school folk and or your biblical literates, okay, how long was the flood? They'll say 40 days and 40 nights. I'm like,
Well, that's the
no,
rain.
no, that's the rain. They were the waters swelled on the earth for 150 days. You know, just shy of half a year.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, this was not a short time they were up there, or down there, or on there. Directions get weird when everything's covered in water. Now, this is a point I will make, and I'll try to have us talk more about this in the next episode if I remember. There is an somewhat obscure tradition in certain Orthodox and other groups that the location of Noah's Landing has been found. I don't know if you've heard about this.
I know I've definitely heard at least once or twice over the years, oh, we found the ark, you know, we think
Yeah.
we found the ark. It's like, did you?
Well, there is odd consistency in the belief that Noah's Landing is on Mount Ararat in Turkey. There's an ancient city there that is.
Well, isn't there like a textual reason for that?
Yeah, I don't recall. We'll see as we get closer to the actual landing. Because hey, spoiler alert, I may be a pastor, but that doesn't mean I read everything and have everything memorized detail by detail, even the big stories. So I don't remember if there's a textual reason for that. We'll find out in a couple of weeks. But as I recall, there is a village at the base of Mount Ararat that's known, like in the local language, as something like Noah's Landing, and has been since before like recorded history. So like there are interesting signs that point to that as a potentiality for the biblical literalist. Now, Ararat is a weird mountain. It's not entirely well explored. Like there's some stuff out there that like imaging devices have seen that are weird, but we can't really get up there. It just might be that it's a weird shaped mountain. Who knows? But that does exist in the popular mythos as, if not a proof, which I wouldn't say it is, but definitely an indication of some literal aspect of the story. You know, since nobody's ever been able to really get any proof out of that, we can't like carbon date things and start getting ideas there. But if it is connected to a literal story of Noah and his flood, one would assume it would be several thousands of years old at least. But that's just a nice little fun fact to consider when we're talking about these guys being on a big old boat for forever.
Yeah.
Which again, just the logistics of it as put, as literal, don't work. Like you're absolutely right. Like there's no literal way for this to have actually happened. It couldn't have happened the way it's put down. Not if we're taking it as literal.
And again, as I said in the last episode, I feel like there's some truth to this. Just personally looking at, you know, everything on offer as far as facts are concerned. I think there's got to be at least some truth to this. But again, stories this old and going through this, you know, the game of telephone, not just being spoken word, but also then going through how many linguistic translations. And then on top of that, I mean, even just the English translation, I was looking today at a Psalm 23 interpretation from like, you know, Old English and Middle English and stuff, and you can't recognize it. It's just
I did Psalm 23 as a
what?
Translation project when I was in college, actually.
Really?
I did that as, and this is going to sound weird, I did it as a kind of a thesis paper for my Japanese class.
Interesting.
Yeah, I had an independent study for one semester and was told to tackle any project I wanted. I said, you know what? I'm interested in how full of crap biblical literalists are. So I don't know any of these languages yet because I was still an undergrad yet. But I'm going to get out.
You've always had a bone to pick, man.
Oh, you know me. I've always had a bone to pick with ridiculous people. So I went into I stole into the seminary library and got my hands on a couple of interlinears. And what I did is I made a rough translation from Hebrew. And then I got a rough translation, or I took the Septuagint and then a rough translation from Greek. And I translated those both into English, literally once, and then once with an eye to figurative translation, to making
Yeah.
sure that it kind of made more sense. So I had 4 translations there. And then I went ahead and I had those 4 translations in English, and I translated them into Japanese, each of those 4 things, once into Japanese literally and once into Japanese figuratively, just to see how sensicalness traveled down those lines. And wouldn't you know it, the most literalist translations were absolute, complete horse hockey gibberish by the end. Like, they made absolutely no sense. And that's starting out with a piece of poetry that's fairly straightforward, linguistically speaking. We try to apply that logic to something like this in Genesis. God only knows how much of a mess it's going to get. And that's just what we have now.
Yeah.
So one thing that always echoes me, and this is as much an emotional piece as a literary piece, this whole last chunk from kind of verse 17 all out, the part we talked about earlier, that's basically
Just the over and over.
No, seriously, everybody dies. For me, in reading this, the vibe of this section has always been very Battlestar Galactica, if you get my take.
I have not seen it.
Oh, that is a shame, particularly the newer version. I say new, it's still from the early 2000s, but you know what
I remember.
That one I love because it's all about literal post-apocalyptic humanity. Like, everybody's dead except we few. And there is an emotional component to the way this is put down that is almost a lament. The degree of emphasis, the way it's like, I remember, because for those of you who don't know, I have an artificial wrist. I had it utterly obliterated when I was in college. And I remember when I had the accident, I couldn't stop just twitching it. Like, the wrist was gone. It was just a mush of destructive mess in there. But I like, and it wasn't like an unconscious reflex move. Like, some part of me, like, I was like, I want to move it and I can't. Like, I cognitively knew that it was gone, man. That wrist was not there anymore. But I couldn't stop trying to use it. I couldn't stop looking at it because I couldn't reconcile to myself with what had been lost yet. And I see in this emphasis something very similar to that. This kind of, oh my God, everyone's dead. No, really, oh my God, everybody's dead. They're all dead. They're all gone. Kind of like, whoo, sort of mentality here. And I think that is an important take on this. Like, when we take this in a Sunday school way, we tend to take that as Noah was good, so he got on the ark and he just kind of laughed at all the other unrighteous people, like, ha ha, you all gonna drown. And then they all drowned. And then he went and made a new, brand new civilization, which didn't involve him getting drunk, naked, and possibly having children with his children. Like, none of that happened. He was happy because all the unrighteous people died, and that's a good thing. And that's how we often take it in Sunday school. But there is, at least to me, there is a mournfulness here that we don't really talk about in this passage all that much. You know what I mean?
I can see it being taken that way, except for isn't the dialogue, the actual text there, supposed to be no, it's not. I'm misremembering it that quickly. Yeah, I can definitely see it like that.
The repetition here is one of the most bold emphatics that I've seen in the Bible here. Like, and so that's why I read this kind of mournful terror out of it. I will not be so bold as of an ancient biblical scholar to insist that that's how it was intended, but I wouldn't be surprised to discover if it was. And I think, like, we can talk, like, a lot of this passage is about the function of the ark and, you know, the sequence of events. This particular story, unlike a lot of stuff in the Bible, is meant to be at least semi-historical. So we're going to get a lot of historical or historical adjacent expression here, which unfortunately doesn't give us a whole lot to talk about. It's like, this happened, then this happened, and there were this many of this thing, and there were this many of that thing. It's basically just like a roster of things and a list of events. But I think it's important because the sparseness of that makes it really easy for us to read an inhumanity into it.
Yeah, for how long and occasionally rambling the Bible can be, it actually moves pretty quick through like most of it. It occurs to me.
Yeah.
Nice
Like,
copper mug. Uh,
yeah, no, like when it's time for a thing to happen, that thing happens. And there's not really a lot of obsessing about it. Like there's more time spent in stories that are more clearly meant to be moralistic rather than historical. So things like this here, this is probably the closest to a remnant of a historical account that we have in the early Bible, I think. Like everything else is open to interpretation. We get a little closer to that when we get to the Exodus, but even that is semi-historical at best. There is in its construction an apparent attempt to keep this as close to being in history as possible. That doesn't mean it's accurate historically the way we might think of it, of course.
yeah.
Because what counts as accuracy differs. But yeah. So
Oh, this was an odd one. The Lord shut him in.
yeah.
So like God shut the door. It didn't have
Yep.
like a police system.
Well, I think again,
A story this sparse, I feel like the details must be important.
you're not wrong. But again, let's raise the question as what the point of details are in a story like this, even in a historical story. Like we tend to look at it mechanically in English and in the modern era, where we see something like that and we ask, just like you did, well, why did the Lord show him? Why didn't he have a police system? Like you'd think he could design a basic door for the ark, right? And what they're trying to express here isn't the historical narrative functional aspect of God literally standing outside, putting a hand on and shutting the doors and then locking it from the outside and saying, all right, you all be safe in there. Kick the tires once and get on the road. You're not really seeing that here.
So it's more of like a metaphysical sort of concept.
I would say that it borders between the real and the metaphysical here, in that I would not be opposed to an interpretation of the Lord being the one who physically shuts the door, as long as we understand that what's important here is the separation and not like the act of who physically rotated the hinges.
Not the mechanics, but the
Yeah.
concept
Exactly.
being dealt with. Yeah.
The image that's meant to be conveyed here is righteous Noah and God on opposite sides of a closed door. And God turned, like the image you kind of get here is God closing the door with Noah on the other side, and then God kind of turning around and being like, let's do this. So that's the mentality that's meant to be communicated here. And this is something we're really going to have to reckon with over time, is that a lot of times what the Bible's trying to communicate isn't mechanically literal in the way we anticipate. Even when it's trying to be literal in its expression, what it's trying to communicate is usually something much more emotional or moral rather than historical in the way we understand it, which is mechanical and factual. Because ancient people had different understandings of what history meant. And that makes sense too. If you think about it, like, 4, 5, 6, 7,000 BC, whenever, there really wasn't a way to know what happened with these other people last week. We're like, particularly if we take these as oral histories that were later written down, like we're talking about things that come from the time before the written word. Like there wasn't a way to make historical communication happen. So what we were as a species interested in passing down wasn't like mechanical details. It was, what did we learn from this? So that we don't forget the things that we learned from this and go back to being the same people we were that, tripped over the same problem.
I feel like in the Ark story in particular, it's really easy to get caught up in the mechanical details because they take the time to tell you the measurements for the boat.
Yeah.
And like the, two of every kind, like they spend some time on the mechanics of it.
Yeah.
And the mechanics don't make any sense. And then they continue forward and you're like, okay, more mechanics that don't make any sense. Like poorly written, but is not a fair.
From a modern eye, certainly. But again, like that's assuming that those details were there to express mechanical purpose. We'll see this
And again, the game of telephone, the
yeah,
thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and how many different languages. And
that's true. But we'll also see this again when we get to the building of the first temple, for example.
oh, that'll be fun.
Yeah, major stories about major events tend to have, as a component, physical descriptions. Now, there's a lot of theories as to why this might be in a story like Noah. It may have been because oral histories were communicated kind of like kabuki and no and whatnot in Japan via community theater. Like it's, in oral transmitting societies, those histories aren't just people sitting there as a storyteller. Like they're usually enacted by people within the community.
Well, and honestly, even just knowing that that's something that they tended to do for important stories was give you some physical, literal, like measurements and like material stuff laid out.
Yeah.
That makes it make a lot more sense. And yeah, different cultures had different things they did for that. I mean, it's why reading the Iliad is such a wide awake nightmare, because it's like there's all this fascinating story muddied in like the description of every entry and exit wound and everything that they had on every ship and like everybody's full ancestry. And yeah, it's a lot, but there were reasons in that culture why they did that. And there's reasons for this, and I didn't know. So,
and where we decide to drop the necessity of description, that's an issue that persists today. Or have we forgotten the story of the great dark caped warrior Darth Vader standing on his giant triangle Trisket ship that actually doesn't make sense when you think about it, because there'd be like 25,000 people on that, and that's way too damn big for a spaceship.
But it's cool.
It's cool, exactly. And you've got just enough detail so that you can process it in your little monkey brain and put it together and be like, okay, that's the story. And I think that's
painting a picture.
Exactly. And I think that's what a lot of this measurement stuff is getting at here. Is it's not about providing the accurate dimensions in case God goes back on his word later on and you need another flood vessel. It's much more along the lines, I think, of the way these ancient cultures would paint a picture of what happened, because you couldn't just pop open your iPad and Google like images of Noah's Ark here, with your kids later on. Like you had to know roughly what the thing looked like. And you had to be able to draw it, or you had to be able to express it in some way. And that's, I think that's really why we get what we're getting here. Why we're getting all of these descriptions. It's not, again, meant to communicate, these were the exact measurements of this, be ready, you might need to build another one. It was more about like, this is, 10,000-year-old CGI, basically.
All right. That makes a lot more sense. Yeah. This has been really enlightening.
Well,
we see what else. I mean,
glad.
I guess I know that is sort of the point. All right, let's see.
I've got everything I meant to dig into. You got anything else you want to?
Yeah, I'm not really seeing anything else.
Well, then I think
we touched briefly on the clean and unclean animals, and
so
clearly they weren't all for sacrifice. And you had said something about it's for purpose of sacrifice, but it says to keep their kind alive on the face of all the earth, which still brings me back to, okay, why? If you wanted to keep all their kind alive on the face of the earth, then why go with a flood? And I'm going to stop myself because because there's like, okay, what about something that just specifically affects humans? And I'm like, we're not going to talk about that during a pandemic.
Yeah, and there's no point in trying to what if God in a creative or destructive scenario. Like, why did God do this instead of no? God exists outside of time and can see way more than we can anyway. So I'm not going to pretend to be able to guess as to why this was the particular choice. My best guess would be that God had kind of a narrative thing going, and that Noah was still, because of that spirit of God indwelt that made him live to 950, whatever reason, Noah still had a part in that narrative that God was rolling forward. It wasn't that the whole narrative was meant to come to an end here. It was that just about everything else that was part of the narrative had become problematic.
I still think it's important to like ask these obnoxious questions and stuff.
I agree.
Because like, I mean, I'm coming from a background where I was raised in the church.
Mhm.
Like this is awesome reading back through the Bible again, because I haven't done it in a long time, but like I've read the whole Bible.
Yeah.
It's and lots of parts of it, lots of times. I didn't do the whole yearly whole Bible thing, but like, and I still can think of all of this stuff and be like, no, wait a minute, even though it's entrenched in like my psyche, I can look at it and be like, no, this is stupid. This doesn't make any sense. Why did it? The asking why of why God does things is something that anyone new to the faith or just curious is gonna do. So I feel like it's important to allow those questions to be asked and not just be like, oh, well, you can't question God.
Yeah, and this is important, and this is something that a lot of more modern quote unquote Christians tend to forget. There is a divinity present in questioning. There is a spirit, like the spiritual practice of curiosity is something that we often treat as a failing rather than what it's designed to be, which is a virtue. Like we don't develop, I'm going to sermonize here for a second, but in the new covenant era given to us by Christ Jesus, we are meant to use our curiosity, our understanding, to begin to interpret and understand the scriptures better, to be able to apply them to new and changing realities and to adapt. And if we just start blindly saying, hey, it's what it says in the Bible, then we're no better than the Shammai school Pharisees that Jesus was often fencing, like who are arguing the exact same thing. Like the whole point of this spiritual endeavor is to keep asking questions, find answers. And when the answers are ones we don't like, we go back to those fixed constants. God is love. God is the source of all that is good. This doesn't seem to mesh with that. So now it's time for us to try and find a new way to understand that, because, oh crap, that's not working anymore.
Yeah.
In the words of Martin Luther, Ecclesia reformata semper reformanda. The church is reformed and always being reformed, never stopping. All right, I went full theology there for you for a second. I hope that was fun.
Yeah, it's all good.
Yeah. All right. So I think that's going to be the end of this fun and shiny episode. As per usual, Courtney?
Like, share, and subscribe, comment, tell us what's on your mind about what we've been talking about. Tell us stuff that you'd like to hear us talk about. We're doing this series, but there's nothing to keep us from like doing just spotlight episode on a specific topic if there's enough interest. That kind
you
of
got
thing.
An issue, we can do a very special episode. We can do anything like that. We have complete freedom. You want to hear something, you let us know. Get in on the discussion in the comments below. You can get in on the discussion on the Discord server. Leave comments on Facebook. Send a carrier pigeon. Write something in the grass with salt. I don't know. Please don't do that. That would be bad. Whatever you got to do. Whatever you got to do, get us a message and be part of the discussion. And of course, as the lady said, like, share, and subscribe, and share, and also share, because getting this circulated is what helps us being able to get more eyes on it, and that helps us in a million different ways.
If you want us to keep doing this, show it to a friend.
Yeah,
it helps.
Exactly.
And it's why we're doing it. We want to try and kind of open this essential book to anyone who wants to unashamedly explore it with actual faith like a child, which means why. But then if this, then how come that?
Yeah. And so that's the goal here. By the way, if you're listening to this on the podcast channel, it's on YouTube too. You can find it there. And if you're watching us on YouTube, it's also a podcast. So if you want to, listen to this thing in the car, hop on it over there too. We're in both places and it's awesome. Links again down below. As for everybody else, have a great week, and we will see you next time for the thrilling conclusion to the story of Noah and the flood. Bye, everybody.
Bye.